Let me stop this. Oh no, there it goes.
Oh, it says Jeff is recording.
Here we are. We are here with David Young. He is a Grammy nominated musician. He has also done all kinds of amazing things. And he runs David Young Music. And he has written a book called The Real Story of Jesus and His Wife, Mary Magdalene. I was at
story.
Yes, I was at Victory of Light, and it's incredible. Some of you know my background and know that I did lots of things with the church, and a lot of my background is in that. And as we were going to Victory of Light, we were having a conversation about the different talks that were going on, and I pointed out David's, and I was like, that's really interesting to me. I'd like to understand that better because I don't know how I feel about it. Well, the universe does some amazing things sometimes, and it ended up bringing the two of us together in just a synchronicity that I would have not imagined going there. And David asked me to watch his booth while he was doing his talk, and I think I learned more about him as a person than I would have learned any other way. And I got to spend some time with his brother, and we got to talk about, how they grew up together, what they did, just the incredible journey that David has been on to get where he is now. And it really brought me to a place where I needed to learn some things. I needed to learn some things about myself and really open up my mind even more than it already is. So it was an incredible meeting. I got to help somebody out. I got to learn a lot about myself and a lot about the world around us. And it was just incredible. So David, I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, hey, Jeff, good to see you again. Nice for us to become brothers there in Cincinnati at that event. It was so perfect for you to come there and for us to meet and for you to be able to watch my booth while I gave my talk about the true story of Jesus and his wife, Mary Magdalene. And I know you were not necessarily a friend or a fan of Jesus, and that's fine. I was not a friend or a fan of him either. I grew up Jewish, and so when these experiences started to unfold, and then as I began to see how these things were orchestrated, it was quite a shock for me to realize that I was being involved in the story as well. Because growing up Jewish, I mean, you grew up in a Jewish family, you're not even allowed to say Jesus's name in your house. You know what I mean? So, for me at about 55 years old to start seeing the consistency in people who were coming to my meditation events called A Portal Between Heaven and Earth. And for me to hear over 1,000 people who had come to my events share their experience during meditation while I was playing the flutes, that Jesus or Mary Magdalene or Mother Mary had appeared to them during their meditation. It was really mind-blowing. In the beginning, it was like absolutely amazing. I just couldn't, I didn't really know anybody who had had a conversation or spiritual travel with Jesus, Mary Magdalene, or Mother Mary. And so I didn't really know that was on the list of possibilities. You know what I mean? It was never on the menu for me, so I couldn't understand, how that would be on the menu of possibilities for somebody else. And one thing led to another, and what came out of it was this book that I just finished. It's called The True Story of Jesus and His Wife, Mary Magdalene, And the book is 13 inches by 10 inches. It's filled with my paintings as well as the story of what actually happened to them that was orchestrated in my life over the last 3 years.
My dad and I have been going through it because I have, the audio copy here. And I think we're on chapter 23. And,
yes.
It's incredible. Me and my dad sit down there and talk about it because he comes from a very different, perspective. He grew up very, very non-practicing Catholic. Probably hasn't set foot in a church since I got married about 15 years ago, and I think that's the last time that he was in a church. So now I'm divorced and getting married again. So it's really.
One.
So it's it's interesting having my dad sit down and listen to that with me because it challenges a lot of what he was taught growing up and the things that he has seen. But even though he's sitting there thinking, hey, there's a lot of possibility to all of this because, the things that we were taught, we know that, with all the things that have happened with the Catholic Church and all the suppression and things like that, that there have been things that have not been spoken about. And there have been things that have been pulled away. So it's really interesting to see my dad really looking and struggling with some of those issues and listening to this and thinking, this is really interesting. It's very provoking to have those beliefs and those ideas that he grew up with challenged. And he watches a lot of he watches a lot of TV, but he watches all kinds of things about aliens and all these different things. And it's very interesting to see that, there is a whole culture out there that their core beliefs were that in this Christmas story, and this is what happened, and this is how it happened. And seeing that as he's watching kind of change and taking some different understanding from that is really interesting for me to see.
Yeah, I'm sure. When I was having the book translated into Spanish, because um, Jesus and Mother Mary are hugely important to about 98% of all of the people in South America, Central America, and Mexico. You know, and so I had it right off the bat before the book was even put out in English. I already started translating the book into Spanish. You know, um, and the person who translated into Spanish, I said, well, before you finish the translation, I want you to share this with your parents, because I know your parents are in their 70s. They grew up Catholic. And I want you to share it with your parents and whichever of your parents' friends would like to read it, because I'd like to see how they feel about it, because what, they grew up with the same thing that your dad grew up with,
Yeah.
and so it was shared with 5 people in their 70s who grew up Catholic. And I was surprised and amazed that they loved it.
Yeah.
It clarified so many things that never made sense to them, you know, because, if they're in their 70s, that means basically for about 60 something years, they've been told the story that is not the true story, you know. And so then the next step is finding a way inside yourself to, well, now that you know this information, where do you put your faith or your belief when you've been told one story and you find out historically how what was told is not what's in the Bible. So you have to make a decision as a reader, somebody who's grown up Catholic, who has all that stuff that they have to consider is not necessarily the truth. It's kind of like similar to somebody who is 7 years old, and we were all 7 years old before. You know what I mean? Somebody who's 7 years old and who, from the time they were a toddler, has been told the story about Santa Claus. And usually, when we're about 7 or 8 years old, we find out that that's not the real story about Santa Claus. You know what I mean? Your father or your mother is really Santa Claus. There's no guy with a white beard with a big red suit and a big belly with the reindeers and the sleigh. He didn't find a way to get his big belly down your chimney. You know what I mean? That's not the real story. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And at a certain point, as children, we have to face the facts of saying, well, Santa Claus wasn't what I thought he was, you know? And the unique thing about this is that if there is anybody in this entire universe that wants to clarify who he really was and who he really is, it's Jesus and Mary Magdalene and Mother Mary. Because there are so many things that were fabricated, lied about, to make Christianity become this story that it became that people know it as. Now, the good thing about your dad is that once you got married, your dad left religion. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So he's already had, let's say if that was 5, 10 years ago, he's had 5, 10 years ago to process his new viewpoint on what religion is. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Which is a good thing. I mean, there are some people, I do these events. Last night I did my 390th event in the
Oh,
last 3.5 years,
wow.
and, about 360 of those events were called A Portal Between Heaven and Earth, where they were meditation events where I would do a half-hour introduction, a half-hour flute meditation. Then people would have a chance to share their experiences, to either ask questions about their experience or to just share it because they wanted to share what they just experienced. And then after the sharing section, then there's an intermission, then there's a second meditation and a second sharing. Okay, so it's been an amazing education for me to hear over 4,500 people in the sharing section share that they had an experience with their grandmother, their mom, a best friend from childhood who died young. And to hear 4,500 people share what that was like, okay? Because that's what started initially when I started doing these events. There were about 500 people over about a 6-month period who had experiences with their dad who had died 20 years ago, or their best friend who had died when they were kids and never even thought about him in the last 30, 40 years. You know what I mean? And so after a while, hearing these experiences became a part of my day, a normal part of my day. Like, gee, am I going to have a coffee or a tea? And is this woman tonight, is she about to share her experience with her grandmother or her grandfather? And when you hear these things so often, it starts to not feel so shocking anymore.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, in the beginning, it was completely shocking to me because I didn't know that was possible. When I started doing these events, I had been meditating for 30 years. I had lived a very pure spiritual life for 30 years, from the time I was 22 till I was 52. And these experiences started when I was 49. And I started doing these events when I was 52. Okay, 52, 53 years old, And so after 6 months, about 500 people have shared. They've reconnected with one of their loved ones. And so it's now a normal part of my day, as I said. Well, somebody asked me to do an event without doing that much talking before the first meditation, and just do the 30-minute meditation, right? And then have the sharing, and then have a time for people to take a stretch break or use the restroom, and then do the second one. And in that meditation, 3 people in the room all saw Jesus standing in the same spot in the room.
Hmm.
Now, growing up Jewish, that was quite a surprise. You know what I mean? I wasn't expecting that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
And so there was a famous channeler who was helping me understand why these 500 people had had these beautiful experiences with their loved ones who are now in heaven, And so I called him up. His name was Bob Murray, and I spoke to him every day for 2 years for an hour or an hour and a half. And he was from Canada. He was an older guy in his 70s, and he was a retired school teacher. And he had been channeling for me at that point for about a year, helping me understand what was happening at my events. These events were originally called soul activation events because people were explaining that they felt like their soul was activated to a higher level. And then I decided to call it soul ascension events. And then so many people were describing my events as a portal between heaven and earth. And I finalized, the title of these events to be called A Portal Between Heaven and Earth, So I asked Bob Murray if he could channel Jesus so we could have a talk. Because, I'm a musician. I've been a musician all my life. And I figured, well, if 3 people in the room saw him standing in the room, well, that means he must have seen me playing if he was standing in the room. you know, and being a musician, I thought, well, that would really look good on my resume. You know? That's really what I was thinking, you know. I'm trying to I'm trying to get somewhere in the music business. People are having all these miracles at my events that I didn't even know were possible. And then the next thing that happened is 3 people see Jesus in the room, right? What is going to happen next, you know? Oh, really? Wow. So I asked Bob if he could channel Jesus, and he said he would try. He couldn't guarantee it. And so Bob got silent on the phone for a couple of minutes, and then he said to me, "Okay, I've connected with Jesus. What do you want to ask him?" My mind went blank. I couldn't think of anything to say, and all I could think was, wow, this is so weird. I mean, whoever has a conversation with Jesus, you know what I mean? Like, I was definitely out that day in music school when they were teaching us about that, because I missed that memo completely, you know? Like, really, you know? So, after a couple of minutes, he said, "I've connected with Jesus. What do you want to ask him?" And I said, this just feels so weird and so strange because I grew up in a Jewish family, you know? And he said, "Well, I could understand that. I grew up in a Jewish family also." That was the first thing he said to me in that channeled conversation through Bob Murray. And it made me laugh, and it made me relax a little, because it was really funny and it was kind of silly. And I enjoy silly sense of humor, you know?
Yeah.
So I said, "Can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Because I don't know what to believe about what I've heard about you. And I also don't know what not to believe about what I've heard about you. You know, I'm trying to cover my bases, you know." So I said, "Can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Because I don't know what to believe about what I've heard about you. And I also don't know what not to believe." And so the first thing he says was, "I don't like pedestals. When people put others up on a high pedestal, the only thing they get is a stiff neck from looking up." And I thought that was funny, you know. And then the second thing he said was, "I don't like rituals. Because when people do rituals, they think they're getting closer to God. But the fact is that a ritual is done so many times over and over mechanically that it's not coming from your heart. It's not coming from love. And the only way we get closer to God is through opening our heart and through love." And at first I thought he was talking about the Catholic Church, but then the more I thought about it, every religion has rituals that people do over and over again. And eventually, you know, it's just a mechanical thing. It's really not a spiritual, um, it doesn't have the spiritual meaning as if you're really opening your heart, trying to connect with God, you know? Because, you know, what you do in your ritual is a repetitive thing, you know? Where when you're really sincerely trying to connect with somebody, you're not going to a repetitive speech or a repetitive stanza that you've read in a book. You're really opening your heart to God and saying, "God, I want to know. I, I really want to see you. I really want to connect with you. I really want to know who you are." Just the same way that George Harrison wrote those words into the song, "My Sweet Lord." That was a sincere, you know, it's not like you're reading your entrance speech from a book or from memory. You're in that moment. You're saying, "God, I really want to understand you better, you know, and I really want to understand this story that you've given me, supposedly about Jesus or Moses or Krishna or Buddha. I really want to. I want to have a one-on-one experience with you, Creator, to show me what is the real deal, you
You,
know."
you know, it's amazing. You know, I've been involved in the church for a long time, right? And what I found with that is, you're exactly right. It is when people get to that place, they have a spiritual experience when they get to that place where their heart is crying out to
Yes.
God and saying, "I need this." It's not when you're sitting there singing your hymns and all those
Yeah.
things and going through the chanting and the meditations. That puts you in a receptive place. But what really connects you with God is that heartfelt connection and allowing yourself to open up to that and asking for that. It is that emotional connection that gets you to that place. Yeah, I think you're completely right with that.
Well, the thing is that Christianity teaches us to become followers.
Mm.
And the truth is that God wants us to become leaders. Okay? There's enough followers in the world for everybody. You know what I mean? The ascended masters and the archangels, they're not looking for people to become a follower of something that happened 4,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. You know what I mean? That's not what's going to take you to your full spiritual potential. You know what I mean? Buddha did not become a master by being a follower. Jesus didn't become a master by being a follower. They went on their own path to find what was a higher truth for each of them and all the other ascended masters as well. You know what I mean? You don't become an ascended master by being a follower. You becoming an ascended master, unfortunately, part of it is the process when we are being stretched. Yeah. And when we're experiencing that the big spiritual shift that each spiritual seeker experiences on their way as they're climbing up the ladder, the heavenly ladder, the spiritual ladder, that each one of us has a chance and an opportunity to climb. But part of the unfortunate, uncomfortable part of that journey that each of us has an opportunity to take is the time when we are crying out. Yeah. And we're saying, you know what, man, me repeating these things from this Bible is not helping me. You know what I mean? I'm in the same position I was in last week, last month, last year, and I can't stand it another minute. And so we forget whatever was the ritual that we had been doing for however many years. And we cry out to whoever, whatever. You know, in when I first started getting involved in my spiritual path when I was 22 years old, you know, I didn't know who to call God. I didn't know what to call God. So I decided that I was going to call God whoever, whatever. Because this way I was covering all bases. You know what I mean? I didn't know who God was. I didn't know what it was. So if I called it whoever, whatever, you know, I'm not excluding anybody, you know. But that's really the truth of where I was coming from when I was 22 years old. And I started to meditate. And I started to feel this inner peace while I was meditating, because there were days that I woke up when I was 22 years old when I would wonder to myself, you know, my life is so horrible right now. I don't know if I have the strength to live through another one of these days, you know. And at the end of the day, when I had, you know, when it was time to go to sleep, before I went to bed, I would thank whoever, whatever, for giving me the strength to live through that day, because when I woke up that day, I really wasn't sure how I was going to be able to live through the sadness that I had about where my life was at, you know. And so I would thank whoever, whatever, at the end of the day for getting me through that day. And that's how I started my spiritual path, you know. And the thing is that when something comes from your heart, it has a different frequency, a different energy when you're just reading something from a book or reading it from memory. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because there's an intensity in there when it's coming from your heart and you are talking out to whoever, whatever you decide to call whatever God is to you. You know what I mean? And that energy is felt. Now, one of the things that I want to clarify here is something that most people don't know. But when we think about God, and there's been more arguments about that than anything else in the history of intelligence or lack of intelligence, you know what I mean? But when we think about what God is, it's a good thing if you can kind of set some parameters of understanding what we're talking about. So most people, when they think about God, they think about a creator who has created the universe, created heaven, created earth, created each of us, created life itself. Okay, so let's separate the creator from what humans actually experience as God. even what's in the Old Testament and the New Testament and all the different Bibles have references to this light of God. Okay, or the sound of God, because every Bible and every religion has different stories about people who experienced the light of God, the white light, you know what I mean? Or the sound of God, you know? And so let's separate the Creator just for a moment, just for this exercise that I'm explaining here. And let's just say that the Creator has created this thing called life, but its energy and its power are so great that we as human beings couldn't handle if that ginormous energy that we know is the Creator, okay, that we couldn't handle that. Because let's say that our little circuitry system in our mental apparatus and in our soul, let's say our mental apparatus can handle, let's just say 100 pounds of spirituality, just for simplicity's sake, right? And let's say that the Creator itself vibrates at this frequency of 1 trillion pounds of spirituality, and our little system can only handle 100 pounds of it. Like, let's say 100 pounds of this spiritual light, or 100 pounds of this spiritual energy, right? So the Creator, obviously, because it's created us and created everything, is completely aware that our souls and our minds can only handle 100 pounds. So the Creator, the first beings that the Creator has created are called the archangels. So we have Archangel Michael, Archangel Gabriel, Archangel Raphael, Archangel Uriel. Those were the first 4 archangels that were created by the Creator itself to be intermediaries, so they can step down that zillion pounds of energy that the Creator has. And so that these archangels can work with us so we can unfold in a way where it doesn't blow our circuits and ruin us. So we can't have practical, responsible lives anymore, because that incredible, intense, godly energy is too much for us. So the first beings that the Creator has created are the archangels, right? And this does not matter what religion you are, because in Christianity they have these cute little pictures of Archangel Gabriel and Archangel Michael. You know, if you had to make a little picture of the biggest tsunami wave that you ever saw in your life, a little picture this big is really not going to do justice to this gigantic tsunami wave. Because what could you put in a little picture this big that would show the immensity and the power of a tsunami in a little picture? You know what I mean? Just really wouldn't do it. So seeing a little picture of Archangel Gabriel looking cute in Christianity, that's not going to really give you the feeling of the immense size and energy and power and love and wisdom that each of those archangels have. You know what I mean? So it's kind of funny to see a little picture of them this big, where, holy cow, when a person has an actual experience with one of the archangels, I'll tell you, this is anybody out there who's listening to this and watching this interview is going to relate to what I'm saying right now, because they've actually had an experience with one of the archangels. Because the natural response when you start having experience with an archangel is this visual I'm going to give you right now. Because they're so huge. They are these beings of white light with this immense love. Now, in the Old Testament, when people had an experience with that white light like that, because they come as this white light, sometimes you can see them in the shapes of humans. You know, like Archangel Michael, he always has a sword, because he's the archangel who's responsible for protection. Okay? And Archangel Gabriel, which I actually just found out over the last 2 weeks, what his responsibilities, we all know that, you know, in Christianity, they say he plays a horn. Okay? Well, we all know that in every single religion, they talk about the sound current. In Christianity, they call it the Holy Spirit. The Native Americans, you know, called it, you know, the Great Spirit, you know. Um, well, every religion, Buddhism has it, calls it the sound current. But basically, what the sound current, what every religion teaches is that the sound current comes out of the heart of God in creation and comes down through all the different spiritual levels of heaven and eventually comes down. And in each level, the vibration is lowered a little bit. And the lowest form of that vibration is here on earth. Okay. So when we are meditating and we hear that inner sound, whether it's that sound of like the high frequency wires, the electricity sound that you can hear in your ears, you know, or whether it's a buzzing sound, or if it's a sound of a flute in your inner ears, or whatever sound that you're hearing in your meditation that you hear that's not coming from a physical place, spiritually, it's coming from inside yourself. That sound is actually coming from Archangel Gabriel, because that's his responsibility. He's the messenger of God. And the way God, the creator, communicates with us is through spiritual light and through spiritual vibration or sound. And so that's what Archangel Gabriel's part in all this stuff is. So what I'm trying to say is that when a person like you or I is having an experience with what we think is God, because it's coming as this big light, this big white light, it's not the creator itself. It's the creator flowing through Archangel Gabriel or Archangel Michael or one of the other archangels, and that's how we're getting it. So we actually, those archangels are able to lower their vibration to a way where it doesn't blow our fuses. But I can tell you that it gets close to blowing your fuses. You know what I mean? Because I've experienced this. You know what I mean? And after I experienced it the first time, it changed my life like from that minute forward, because all of a sudden it was so much easier for me to get messages where before my mind might have been getting in the way, like the monkey mind thing. Well, they blasted me with this energy, which I'm sure was just a tiny little bit of their overall energy, you know. But all of a sudden I was knowing things. I was writing charts and coming up with these codes, and all of this information was coming to me that I'd never had before in my life, you know. Now, just to give you how this relates to everything in the big picture, every one of us, every person who's lived in the history of this world has the opportunity to take steps so we climb the ladder spiritually, or to stay in whatever lower level thing that we've chosen to be in, because we all have a choice to be positive or to be negative. You know what I mean? And our lives end up manifesting the things of what we're choosing to be. So the way I simplify religion is there are really only three religions in this world. Okay. And those are the people who are trying to make things better, the other people who are doing nothing, or the people who are making things worse for other people. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what religion you speak, because every religion has aspects of different information that comes from God. And some of it is true, and some of it is make-believe that's made up. You know what I mean? That men made up because they couldn't understand what really happened. And so they came up with the best excuse or the best story they had. And that's what became their Bible, right? So if that's what every human being who's ever lived on this earth has a choice of doing, the beings that we know as the ascended masters, Jesus and Buddha and Moses and Krishna and all of them, and Mother Mary and Kuan Yin and Isis and Mary Magdalena, all of the goddesses and all the ascended masters, right? They each in their earthly lifetimes, like every one of us, were given the choice of looking for love in situations or looking to accentuate the opposite of love in situations. And the way they became ascended masters was by studying under the archangels, whose job is to help uplift us and clarify and enlighten us. Because once we have that experience of their incredible godly heavenly energy, well, then that really gives us a big lift on our spiritual path. And that is how Buddha became a master, and that's how Jesus became a master, and every other one became a master. Now, there is so little that's in the Christian Bible that's actually factual and actually happened that way and was even spoke the way it is in the Bible. There are tiny little bits of truth in there. Now, in the Christian story, they make it look like Jesus was born a God, right? That he didn't need anybody to help him become godlike. That he was just magically born perfect and he was born a God, you know? Well, there's one line in the Bible that shows that he had an ascended master, an archangel. It's different. There's a difference between the archangels and the ascended masters. The archangels are the highest level, you know. The reason why Archangel Michael ends with EL in Michael, and Gabriel ends with EL, and Raphael and Uriel all end in EL is because EL means of God, which means they did not have earthly lifetimes. Okay? And so in the Bible, one of the few things that's actually true is when Jesus calls out and says, Eli, why have you forsaken me? Now, there were two brothers who were physical beings who became ascended masters and later became archangels. And that is Elijah, which is in the Old Testament, and Enoch. Now, there are these missing books from the Bible called the Keys of Enoch, because Moses's spiritual guide, the ascended master Moses studied from, was Enoch. Enoch later became known as Archangel Metatron. Okay? Elijah later became known as Archangel Sandalphon. Elijah was Jesus's guide. He was the ascended master who was working with him. Okay? That's why when he was on the cross, he said, Eli, why have you forsaken me? Okay, because he was calling out to his guide saying, hey, what the heck is happening here? You know, you've been working in my life for years, making all this magic happen in my, you know, through me that Jesus was able to see, and his family, and, you know, Mary Magdalene was able to do magical stuff. She was an absolute, she was a total higher level person. She was a shaman. She did healings and she knew how to do all of this cool spiritual stuff. You know what I mean? Because they actually, Jesus and Mary Magdalene, at different times, studied in the mystery schools of Egypt, because Egypt is right next to Israel. The Red Sea is what separates it. You know what I mean? And so on their own, before they met, Jesus and Mary Magdalene studied at the same mystery schools in Egypt. And then after they studied individually, before they met each other in Egypt, they each were able to travel to India and study from the gurus and the yogis in India who knew how to do magic. They knew how to do healing. They knew how to do all this stuff. India was thousands of years ahead of where they were at as a society, and with spiritual unfoldment where they were at in Israel. You know what I mean? So what happened, what was explained to me was that, boys, when they were old enough to travel and go out and see the world, that's what boys did. You know what I mean? And so he started to travel. It was the reason why the missing years of his life start when he's 12 years old is because every Jewish boy at 12 years old starts studying for their Haftorah, their bar mitzvah, at 13 years old. So they wanted to remove as much of his Jewish heritage as possible because they were building a religion around him, and they wanted to remove his religion, Judaism, from his story so he could look like this magical, he's the only son of God who didn't need to have an education. You know, we all need an education. You know what I mean? Hello, right? And so when he started to travel, the first place he went to was Egypt, because Egypt is right next to Israel, and everybody in Israel knows that there's all this cool spiritual stuff happening in Egypt. You know, people are still going to Egypt for, spiritual enlightenment, And so Mother Mary, when he was 30 years old and when he came back to Israel to reconnect with his family, Mother Mary introduced him to Mary Magdalene at a wedding because Mary Magdalene's mother had died young. And because Mary Magdalene's mother came from a lot of money, Mary Magdalene inherited a lot of money when her mother passed away, and Mother Mary became like an adopted mom or like a mentor for Mary Magdalene. That's what people did. If you lost your mom or your dad, somebody else, stepped up to the plate and took you in. You know what I mean? That's every culture in the world does that, And so Mother Mary introduces Jesus and Mary Magdalene at a wedding, and they have a lot in common because most women never got to go to Egypt. You know what I mean? They didn't have the money to do something like that or go to India. You know what I mean? And because Jesus and Mary Magdalene had both been to Egypt and studied from the mystery schools, and they had both been to India. Jesus, after he went to India, he studied at a Buddhist monastery in Tibet. Mary Magdalene didn't get to that Buddhist monastery, but all the other stuff that they each learned in India and Egypt was part of their spiritual education, which gave them the opportunity to raise their level of consciousness and become more spiritual beings, right? And so they, in that process, were working with the archangels, and that's how they became spiritual masters. This is how it's done. It doesn't happen by accident. Nobody's born perfect. If you had a conversation with Jesus, he would never tell you he was born perfect. He would never, ever tell you that the only way to God, the only way to the Father is through him. Because that's not true. The way he got there was through studying from the different spiritual masters, the ascended masters before him that were working with him, and the archangels before him that were working with him. That's the way it's done. Okay, Jeff.
I think what's amazing about that is one word, is that it takes work, right? We live in this culture now that really has this idea that everything should be easy and we should just be given everything. And the truth is that it takes work. It takes work on ourselves. It takes issues baggage that we carry with us to get us to a place where we are open enough to receive all these things that are there for us. And I think there's some struggle that happens because there are difficult things that happen in our life. Jesus, even when you read the text about him, he went through some things. There were parts of his life that were a challenge, right? It was never, same thing with Buddha. Buddha went through years of his life that were very difficult for him. And it was those moments that shaped the teachings that came from each one of those people. And I think it is...
Can I say something right now?
Yeah, go ahead.
That's because each one of them, Jesus growing up was brought up with the 10 Commandments and the Torah, and he had to leave the education system, the spiritual education system that we call religion. He had to leave that at a certain point because it wasn't fulfilling him. It wasn't giving him the answers that he wanted, the same way that Buddha wasn't getting the answers that he wanted. Okay? And that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm saying, where God is not looking for followers. There's plenty of followers out there. God is looking for people. The ascended masters and archangels are looking for people who have that leadership quality, who are willing to let go of whatever story they've been told as a kid in whatever Bible they grew up with. So this way you make the energy and the effort to find out inside yourself by reaching out. And we don't reach out when it's a beautiful sunny day and we're at the beach with our friends and everything is perfect. You know what I mean? That's not the way human nature works. Because when we're on the beach on that perfect day and the sun is shining down with our friends, we're having a party, right? There are parts of our spiritual unfoldment that are the opposite of a party.
Yeah.
Those are the times when we're being tested. And part of being tested is, are you going to accept the bullshit that's been handed down to you, that was handed down to your grandparents and all your ancestors? Are you going to accept that story? that doesn't really make that much sense if you think about it. Like, really, we all know that chemistry and biology is a science, and we have scientific facts. It is chemically and biologically impossible for a person's body to disappear in 24 hours after they're dead. The idea of Jesus ascending to heaven and completely disappearing biologically and chemically is impossible. There's only one way that you can convince people that that's happened. And that is through a phony story, because that's not what happened. That's what's in my book. That's what they orchestrated in my life. They had different people who were coming to my events, were given different parts of the story of what really happened to him, you know, and the fact that everybody knows he was Jewish, right? Most people don't know that his real name is Yeshua. Jesus is not a Jewish name. You will not ever meet anybody who's Jewish whose name is Jesus, because it's not a Jewish name. You know, you have a list of names that are the choices for Jewish kids when they're born, and Jesus is not one of the choices. I'm sorry, you know. I mean, maybe somebody could be the first, but, you know, I'm telling you, generally, a Jewish person is not ever going to be named Jesus because it's not a Jewish name. Now, most people don't know that he was a rabbi, even though there's 5 places in the Bible where he is called a rabbi. Now, there's a prerequisite to becoming a rabbi. It's very different than the Catholic Church. The prerequisite in Judaism to becoming a rabbi is you have to have 2 things. You have to have a wife and you have to have children, or you cannot become a rabbi. I'll tell you one thing. If the church made that rule that you couldn't become a priest unless you had a wife and kids, all the millions of people who are abused by a priest every single year would never be brought up with that horrible situation.
Yeah.
That's one thing they could have kept from Judaism that would have done them good in the long run. But in fact, the early priests of Christianity, they all were married and they all had children. It wasn't until about 300-400 years later that they made a law that stated that a Catholic priest could not marry. The reason why the Catholic priests were not allowed to marry, it wasn't anything spiritual at all. It was just the church realized that when you had a priest who died, his land and his property and his money were all inherited by his wife and his children. So the church just changed the law that a priest could not marry. So this way their land and their money would be inherited by the church and not their family. That's it. That's the truth. That's the historical fact. That's why they did it. It was nothing about anything else.
You know, it's amazing. When I went through, of course, you know, as I was going through the church and I got getting my ordination and everything, we went through a church history class. And going through church history is really interesting, especially when you get into the Reformation. And some of the things that they did during that time is just incredible that they allowed that to go on. And you know, it was a spiritual practice. One of the things that used to drive me crazy is this whole idea of indulgences, right? Where you are paying money to basically get rid of your sin. Like, hey, put a coin in the box,
right,
and we'll get rid of that sin.
I can tell you how that evolved. This has been a warring world for thousands of years. War is not a new thing. Now, okay, and typically the men went off to war. You know, women had kids. They couldn't go off to war. They had to take care of the children while the men went off to war. Now, it's not rocket science to know that horrible things happen in wartime. And people do horrible, horrible things to each other during wartime. So we know that the Vietnam vets came back with this thing called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because while they were fighting in war, they did horrible things to people that they had to live with. And they also experienced horrible things in war, whether being a prisoner of war or getting shot or stabbed or whatever. Okay, so just imagine these men have come back from wartime. They have PTSD. They have guilt over what they've done, the horrible things that they've done. Okay, and they also have the emotional trauma of living through the whole thing. Okay, so what are you going to do with your guilt? They didn't have psychologists back then, right? So where would a place go for, where would anybody go for guidance? You would go to a church, okay? And there's a priest who doesn't know anything about what you've experienced in that horrible wartime, because they've been in their cloak in that safe church, and they've never experienced all those horrible things in wartime that all these men with guilt and PTSD are coming back from this other place with. And they come to a church because they don't know what to do with this guilt that they have. And they don't know what to do with that PTSD that they have. And they say, Father, can you help me? And the priest says, well, if you surrender your life to Jesus, you will be freed of all your sins, and all your guilt and all your PTSD will go away, because Jesus is going to take care of all of it for you. But the fact is that Jesus didn't want you going over to another country and killing a bunch of people because they weren't born Christian. They were happy with whatever religion they studied. All those people in South America, that's not their real religion. South American was a place with Indians, the same way that America had Indians. They had their religions. They had their gods. They had their belief system. Christianity went over to South America and wiped out their indigenous religions that their ancestors had believed in and studied and lived for thousands and thousands of years. The American Indians lived here for 50,000 years at least before the Europeans came here. And what did the Europeans do? Wiped out their religion and wiped out their culture. That wasn't even the culture of our continent. Do you think Jesus wanted people to go back to Jerusalem when Jerusalem was a Muslim city? You think Jesus actually wanted during the Crusades, these soldiers to go massacre all these innocent women and children in Jerusalem because they were Muslims? Jesus is made out of love. Every ascended master learns the law of love. They learn forgiveness, you know. No ascended master wants some people going into another country and destroying their beliefs in their gods that they've had for as long as their culture has existed. You know what I mean? And in the same way, Jesus or any ascended master doesn't want people attacking other countries to take away their land or make them become another religion. You know, the only thing that they don't want as bad as that is they don't want priests to think it's their right to have sex with the kids in their church. God did not give those priests the right to have sex with those kids against their will. So that proves that there's a disconnect between the church and God itself, and between the church and Jesus and Mother Mary. Because Jesus and Mother Mary don't want those priests having sex with those kids, because those kids are going to carry that weight when they become adults for the rest of their life. There's no way our planet can heal. And there's no way that humanity can heal if a percentage of our children every year are being abused by the church. Do you know that in Ireland, 25% of the men in Ireland have come forward and said that they were abused by the priests as their kids? 25% of every man walking down the street in Ireland has been sexually abused by a priest. How do those people heal? How does our world become a healing place if that horrible thing is perpetuating every year, and the popes and the Vatican are doing nothing to protect those kids?
Yeah, you know, it's difficult when there have been institutions that are supposed to be the authority for spiritual guidance that abuse and destroy people and their lives, whether it is sexual abuse that we've seen through the Catholic Church, or spiritual abuse where people are holding things over people, and the whole either do this or you're going to hell. That whole mindset is spiritual abuse, as we are lording that over people and saying that if you don't meet these certain guidelines, then you're never going to be able to live in paradise, or whatever the mindset is for that. And none of that is true, right? we choose to take our lives and to ascend and get our vibrations higher. And we do that through many of the different things that you've already talked about. Really learning and working with those things, learning more and growing. One of the things that I always I always prided myself in, even when I was really preaching and teaching and everything, is I wanted to understand things. I wanted to understand other religions. I wanted to understand different philosophies from those perspectives because I wanted to see why people believed what they believed. That was more important for me than believing any doctrine that any one person put out. I wanted to understand the entirety of people's belief systems and why they chose to believe what they believed and embrace that from their end, because I thought that that was so important, because ultimately that's what drives their entire culture, these belief systems that they have. And, why do we believe that? How do we believe that? What's the experience that's had during that? Is really important to see the truth in the things around us. So
Totally. I completely agree with you. I do. And, I mean, I want to ask you a really silly, simple question, but in your heart, do you believe that God loves you?
absolutely.
Okay. Well, good. Right. Thank goodness we're on the same page with that. Right. So if God loves you, why would God give you a book that says that you were born a sinner and that you are unworthy, and the only way that you could become worthy at all is if you accept somebody who died 2,000 years ago as your Lord? Okay. What about the people who are wonderful people who grew up in a country that didn't have that Bible as in that language as their teaching? So what about all the wonderful people who have grown up in China or Africa who were not born in a place that's a Christian place? Every wonderful, loving, spiritual person in Africa and China, because they didn't grow up with a Christian Bible, they're going to go to hell for eternity, even though they're wonderful people. They're loving, kind, giving people who are making the world a better place. They're not making it worse for other people. You know what I mean? Those people are out of luck. And you're going to convince me those beautiful, kind, loving people who could save your life if you were stranded in one of those countries, even though they weren't born the same religion as you or the same color as you, and they have no chance of going to heaven because they weren't born in a place where Christianity was taught. You actually believe that. That's like you saying, that's like a person saying to God, God, you're not that smart. Because it wouldn't be smart or intelligent for God to not allow certain people into heaven because they didn't grow up in a Christian place. If you're a Christian and if you believe that, then it's not God's fault, because each one of us is given a thing called common sense. You know what I mean? It doesn't make common sense that God would reject people because they weren't born in a Christian country. I mean, it's just so ridiculous, Why would anybody want to be part of a church where they teach you that you're not worthy? That they teach you that you're a sinner. No matter what you do, you're screwed because you were born a sinner. I'm sorry, that doesn't help you climb the spiritual ladder.
Well, and I think what's interesting there is too, there's a difference between teaching and doctrine, because I've been in a lot of different, modalities for that. And looking at that, there's a big difference between that and the book itself, right? So when we're looking at the Bible, are there certain things that people have taken and run with these ideas, maybe taken a few words here, a few words there, and made them into these doctrines that they've founded these churches and these belief systems around? But is that what the real intent was when it was written? And I think there's a big difference between the two of those things.
I completely agree with you. I agree with you, because the way the Bible was originally written is not the Bible that you go into a church and read today. That Bible has been adjusted 1,000 times. It's been changed. It's been added to. It's been taken away. It would be a very core important thing for every single person going to a church to understand the history behind the Bible, that in the year 381 AD, 381 years after they believed that Jesus died, they added the virgin birth to the Bible under the power of Emperor Constantine at the Council of Nicaea, because there were all these fights and arguments and riots starting all over the Roman Empire, because some people believed that Jesus was born God, and some people believed he was born a human being like you and me, that he became godlike and eventually got adopted by God. Okay? And so what Emperor Constantine did is he called this meeting of all the bishops throughout the entire Roman Empire, and it took place in Turkey, and it was called the Council of Nicaea, because Nicaea was the part of Turkey right next to this big lake where they had this big meeting of all the bishops. And they decided that since Buddhism, Mithraism, and 3 other religions at that time had a virgin birth in their Bible, but the original Christian Bible did not have a virgin birth, they decided to add the virgin birth to the Bible, so this way Buddhism would not look cooler than Christianity. That's a fact. The early Bibles in the first 380 years did not have a virgin birth. They added that to the Bible to make it look like a more powerful story that Buddhism had, that Mithraism had. Okay, and just for the record, these are historical things. You don't have to take my word for these things. If you're listening, you go on to Google and you do a search. When was the virgin birth added to the Bible? And this is the historical fact. I mean, we know that in America, the Native Americans lived here before us. We know that, even though we don't see Native Americans walking around with feathers in their hair down the street today. But we know the history that this was their land before our land. This is the history behind Christianity that they choose not to talk about, but it's factual. It's the history. It's in the history books. This is why they did it. There was a holiday 2,000 years ago that was celebrated in Egypt, and if it was in Egypt, I'm sure it spread to other parts of the world, because no religion stays in just one country. People move to other places and they bring their religion with them. So there was a god named Horus. And there's a symbol called the Eye of Horus. Everybody has seen that. It looks like a hieroglyphic. And Horus was born supposedly of a virgin birth. And this was celebrated for 2,000 years before Jesus was born. Supposedly, there were 3 wise men who appeared at his birth. There was a special star that appeared in the sky, and Horus eventually had 12 disciples. Horus's birthday that was celebrated for 2,000 years before Jesus was born. Horus's birthday was December 25th. Jesus wasn't born in December. If you just do the math of when they say he was born in the Bible, it was not in December. It was not in wintertime. He was born in springtime. He was born in April. It cracks me up when Christians say you got to keep the Christ in Christmas. What are you talking about? He wasn't in the original Christmas. It wasn't his birthday. They only changed that because it was an Egyptian holiday, and everybody celebrated it on December 25th. So they changed his birthday from April to December 25th because everybody was already used to celebrating the winter solstice on December 25th. It would be like if somebody said in America, okay, we're not going to have Halloween anymore. We'd be like, are you kidding me? That's my favorite holiday. You're not taking my holiday away. And they'd say, well, we're going to rename it. Just the same way Trump renamed NAFTA USMCA. It's the same thing as NAFTA, but he renamed it. The Christians did the same thing with Horus's birthday on December 25th and renamed it Jesus' birthday, and they named it Christmas. It wasn't his birthday. It was never his birthday.
Yeah. Speaking of Halloween, it is also my favorite holiday. If they took that away, I'd be really upset. Yeah. I literally went to 22 haunted houses this Halloween season. I'm a huge Halloween fan. So I get around a little bit for that. Oddly enough, I'm starting to enjoy Christmas, I think, because of my fiance and all that brings with it, just celebrating just us being together and having a first
Absolutely.
Christmas is kind of nice. It's amazing.
Christmas is not about, it wasn't about him for 2,000 years on December 25th. You know what I mean? And the problem is the fact that there's, the the fact that we have these songs that are part of our culture, we hear these songs and it connects us to, oh, I remember listening to that song as a kid, and it's in your culture, it's in your blood, you know what I mean? And the fact that these holidays have these certain things in it, well, we don't want to rock the world of our little children because, you know, they've been brought up with Christmas and, you know, well, at a certain point, somebody's got to say, hey, look, you know what I mean? This wasn't Jesus's holiday. This was an Egyptian holiday for 2,000 years. You know what I mean? And making it all about Jesus, I'm sorry, it's not about Jesus. It's about appreciating the people who make a difference in your life, the people you love, your
Yeah.
friends and your family. That's what it's about. You know what I mean? It's not about a donkey and a little shack and you know, it's just not about that. You know what I mean? He's not about that. These songs written about him, like he's the golden child, you know, oh my gosh, he tells people, if you actually have an experience with Jesus in your meditation, he's not ever going to tell you he's the only son of God. He's going to tell you that you have the same potential as he has. That if you focus on climbing the spiritual ladder and learning to forgive and learning to love everybody, then you can have the same experience as me. You can get that elevated state of consciousness. You know, there's nothing stopping you. Well, there's actually one thing that's stopping you from getting into an elevated spiritual consciousness. And the thing that would stop you is by believing what the Bible says, that you were born a sinner and that you're not worthy. That's the one thing that can stop you from having that experience. And I'm telling you, when you have good energy, when you have love inside yourself, like, for example, like if you meet somebody, you want to share that love that you have, right? And you want to share the wisdom that you've learned in your life, Jeff, with somebody who is interested in becoming more spiritual. Is that true?
Absolutely.
Well, every ascended master feels the same way. They want to share that love that they've learned how to experience, they've learned how to ascend to. They
You know,
want you to have that experience because it's your divine right to have that experience the same way it was their divine right to have that experience.
I think it's amazing when you, whatever your tradition is, when you get down to it, when you get to a place and you're working up these human needs and these this this vibration level at the very top, it's always about giving back, right? It always goes full circle. And when you get to that place, you want to show other people that wisdom and that those amazing things that you've learned. And I think it's just incredible that we, no matter what tradition you're in, once you get to that place, it's time to teach and help other people experience that, and those people that resonate with that, which is one of the things that was amazing to me, even with my own preconceived notions going to the event. When you and I met, there was obviously a connection there. And I told Caitlin this when I went back the second day on Sunday, and I walked up and you saw me and you gave me a hug. There was so much heartfelt connection there. I was like, this is incredible. This is exactly what I was here to do and to experience. That meant a lot to me. So it was very interesting to be able to do that.
The way these things work, these things are set up in advance. You know what I mean? You had told me that before you had read something about my workshop, The True Story of Jesus and His Wife, Mary Magdalene. And, it hit you in a certain way because of whatever your upbringing was, you know what I mean? And so you come to this big expo with like 6,000 people there, and you find yourself in front of my booth with my book right there. And all of a sudden you're having a conversation with the guy who you had a preconceived, maybe you didn't have a good, like really, what could anybody say about Jesus and Mary Magdalene 2,000 years later? You know what I mean? And whatever I've heard about Jesus through Christianity, I'm not crazy about anyway. You know what I mean? But that was all set up because, first of all, I needed somebody to watch my booth while I did my 2-hour presentation. And because I flew in from New York, I didn't have anybody to watch my booth. And you seemed like a very grounded, trustworthy person That was the energy I got from you. So I honestly, I had no choice but to say, hey, look, I'm going to be gone for 2 hours. Can I pay you to watch my booth or give you some of my products or something to watch my booth? Because I don't have anybody to watch my booth for 2 hours while I'm going to be gone, you know? And you were open to doing that, right? So that's the way our friendship, the original connection, was made a couple of weeks ago. But if you were to look back from before that date, the Ascended Masters were working with you to connect you with me so we could do this interview and you could share this story in my book with the people who listen to your show. Okay, so they killed two birds with one stone over there. They got somebody to watch my booth, and they also got us to connect so we could do this interview.
Yeah.
You know, now I know we've been on this call for over an hour, and I know that we really have to go. And I didn't plug in my phone, so you know I've got about 6% left of my battery, which is enough to say goodbye. But I thought of a funny way that how we could end this interview. You know, and are you ready?
I'm ready.
So this year for Christmas, give the true story of what really happened 2,000 years ago for Christmas as your present. And my books are available on my website, which is davidyoungmusic.com. It's also available in an audio book if you want to have it as an audio book on CD or thumb drive. Or you could, it's available in Spanish as an audio book or as an ebook. Okay, and there's two versions of the book. This is the expensive version with the expensive binding, but the less expensive version, the kind that will be at all the stores, is this one over here. Okay, and this has a normal binding, and the paper is a little bit thinner than the expensive. This one is $40, and the other one is $65. But anyway, I had to tell people where they could get the book. And
Absolutely.
Jeff, I really want to thank you for being open to come to my booth and watching my booth for me, and also for having me on your show. And if you'd like to do another interview, because we were just really, you know, with a tiny bit into this whole thing, I'd be happy to do another interview with you.
Absolutely.
Make sure you send me the link so I can put this on my website and on my Facebook so people can hear what we talked about today.
Absolutely, for sure, man. We will definitely get together again and have some more good conversation. Thank you for everything, and I look forward to talking to you soon.